If I told you right now to write a check to the IRS for $1 million voluntarily this year when you could legally defer it, you'd probably tell me I was out of my mind, right? But Ted Weschler did the equivalent of that in 2012, except his check was for tens of millions. Well, who's Ted Weschler? Well, he wasn't a gambler or a show-off. In fact, he's one of only a couple of people that Warren Buffett personally handpicked to manage Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio. He is, by almost any measure, one of the most rigorous long-term thinkers in the investment world. So why did he do it? Why voluntarily accelerate a tax bill of that size? The answer will likely change how you think about every dollar sitting in your own traditional 401k or IRA right now. And if you want to find out why, well, you're going to want to listen into this latest edition of the Financial Prof Series. So why did Ted trigger that multi-million-dollar tax bill? And how? Well, the how is quite simple. Shortly after the strategy was signed into law, he did a Roth conversion on his entire $130 million IRA. And if you want to find out what happened to that money afterward, be sure to listen in until the end of this video. Now, the why is a bit more complicated, and it might apply to you too. So let me start with the conventional wisdom, because it's worth understanding before we dismantle it. The standard argument against Roth conversions for high earners and high net worth individuals goes a little something like this, right? You're in the top bracket now, or near it, so converting pre-tax dollars to Roth means paying taxes at the highest rate today. If your income drops in retirement, you're better off deferring and paying taxes at a lower rate later. Now, in a vacuum, that logic is not crazy, but it depends entirely on one assumption holding true, and that is that your effective tax rate in retirement will actually be meaningfully lower. For a certain profile of high earner, that assumption is almost certainly wrong, and if it's wrong, the entire argument collapses. So here are 3 reasons why you might want to consider converting your IRA to Roth. The entire thing, and why Ted Weschler did the same thing when most people didn't. All right, so the first argument is that we're living in a historic tax value. Right now in 2026, we're in one of the lowest income tax environments that the federal United States of America has seen in a long time, roughly a century. The top marginal federal rate sits at 37%. Now that sounds high if you're paying it, but looking at the actual numbers across history, it's actually a remarkably low figure. According to Wolters Kluwer's historical tax analysis, the top income tax rate exceeded 90% from 1944 through 1963, peaking at 94% in 1944. Moving through the following decade throughout the 1970s, the top marginal rate was at 70%. Then in the 80s, it was reduced during the Reagan era, and it did tick back up again under Clinton as we started attacking the national debt that had accrued in the meantime. Now, a fair-minded analysis and a caveat that is worth making here is that the high nominal rates didn't always mean high actual tax bills. The Tax Foundation points out that despite the 90% plus top marginal rate in the 1950s, the top 1% of taxpayers only paid about 42% of their income in taxes, because the bracket only applied to incomes over $200K, roughly $2 million in today's dollars, and wealthy taxpayers made extensive use of deductions and shelters. So that 90% plus figure is real, but it's not the whole story. What is the whole story? Well, that the current rate structure is historically unusual on the low end, and that it was deliberately designed with an expiration date. So let's talk about this from the political angle. The current structure is the product of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, passed under the administration of Donald Trump. Now, those tax cuts were not originally designed to continue in perpetuity. They were set to expire at the end of 2025. However, Congress in 25 did sign them into an extension, into permanent law. Now, the fact of the matter is that we may see these at a future date rise again, just as we did in the 1990s when national debt continued to climb. So it's worth knowing that while that's the law of the land today, it's not a guarantee it will be forever. So getting into our second argument, let's talk about the political favorability of those rates. Again, federal debt is at a very high level right now, and when politicians need revenue, there's a fact. A well-worn path of least resistance is to soak the rich, that is, to raise taxes at the top, right? But even if it goes to from 37 to 39.6%, there's no guarantee that it would stop there. Now, I'm not predicting rates will rise, but I am saying this. If your retirement plan assumes the 37% rate is a permanent floor. You're making a very specific bet on a very specific number. Weschler wasn't willing to make that bet. I don't think you should be either. All right, so the third argument, let's talk about RMDs, required minimum distributions. This is the argument that not everyone thinks about and tends to hit the hardest. And let's say it applies directly to anyone sitting on a traditional 401k or IRA north of about 5 million. Here's how the story unfolds. You retire at 63, your taxable income drops, you're drawing on maybe a brokerage account, maybe doing a little part-time consulting. Someone looks at the picture and says, "See, lower bracket, you should have deferred." But that analysis stops too early. Required minimum distributions begin at age 73, or perhaps 75 depending on your age. And on a $6 million account, the RMD in year one is likely going to be over $225K. Before Social Security, before any other income, anything. And because your account keeps growing even as you take distributions, the RMDs themselves tend to grow over that time. Add in that Social Security and that lower bracket retirement looks near or at that top bracket again, except now you've lost the ability to do much of anything about it. The window to act in that case was earlier, and for many people watching this, the window is now. So let's go ahead and talk about this from a real-world scenario. Meet David. He's 58, senior executive, spent the last $25 years building a multi-million-dollar portfolio. And while he's in the 37% bracket right now and thought about Roth conversions, his advisor has said, no, you'll be lower bracket in retirement. Hang on, not yet. But let's run with that. David retires at age 65 with a $5.8 to $6 million portfolio in his traditional 401k. Now, assume a conservative 6% annual growth. By the time his required minimum distributions begin at age 73, that account has grown to roughly $9.2 million, even accounting for living expenses drawn from other sources in the meantime. His RMD at 73 on a $9.2 million balance is approximately $347,000 that he must take. His Social Security, which he delayed till 70, is $48K per year, of which 85% is taxable, $40.8K. This means he has almost $400,000 in taxable income and very little ability to do anything about it. So let's look at an alternative. Say at 58, David began converting $300K per year for 7 years to a Roth. He pays taxes on that $2.1 million at today's rates, and it's not painless, let me be clear. But by the time he's 73, his traditional balance is materially smaller, his RMDs are significantly reduced, and multi-millions of his wealth is sitting in a Roth, growing tax-free and able to be passed to heirs, also tax-free. The key insight in David's original plan is that he might not be in a lower bracket in retirement. The only real choice was whether to pay taxes at the rates we know today or the ones that might be in the future. David, in this case, chose today and saw a favorable outcome, just like Ted Weschler did. Now, quick pause before we get into that a little bit more. If watching David's scenario just a minute ago made you wonder what your own numbers actually look like, what your RMDs will be when they hit, and whether a conversion strategy makes sense for your situation, that is exactly what I help people figure out with my practice. Click the link in the description and I will put together a personalized 5-minute retirement plan video for you. It's free, it's specific to your numbers, and a lot of people tell me it's the clearest picture they've ever had of where they actually stand. Take a couple minutes and I look forward to hearing from you. Again, the link is in the description. All right, so what does the actual Roth conversion strategy look like in this high net worth, high income scenario? Well, the goal is not necessarily to convert everything overnight. You certainly could, like Ted did, and have a favorable outcome. A massive single-year conversion could spike your tax bill in a way that doesn't make sense for most people, but it could end up being very favorable, particularly if you end up being, throughout the rest of your life, in that top tax bracket, right? Because that means that your bracket is likely never to drop unless Congress changes tax laws. So, as you're considering a massive conversion, whether it be a significant chunk or the whole thing, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, you're not converting to avoid taxes. You're converting to lock in a known rate before an unknown future applies. Second, Roth money is not subject to RMDs during your lifetime, which means it doesn't compound your mandatory income problem later. And third, that those Roth assets, like we referenced a minute ago, are passed to heirs carrying significantly better tax treatment than pre-tax assets. So if legacy is part of your plan, this can matter enormously. The silent co-owner framing is one that I keep coming back to. Every dollar in your traditional or pre-tax IRA or 401k has a silent partner, the federal government. They're going to collect their share, and the only question is when and at what rate. Roth conversion is how you buy out that partner at a price you can actually see. So here's the bottom line. Ted Weschler didn't convert $130 million to Roth because he had money to burn. He did it because he understood something most people don't, that deferral is not the same as avoidance, that today's tax rates are historically low, and that the most dangerous assumption in retirement planning is the one that nobody thinks to question. So if you're in the top tax bracket and someone has told you that Roth conversions don't make sense, ask them to run the full scenario, with RMD projections, with realistic future tax assumptions, with a 20-year horizon, and that answer might look very different from what you've been told. And if you want to know what that scenario looks like for your specific situation, your balances, your timeline, your retirement income picture, that's what the link in our description is for. Again, I'll build you a 5-minute retirement plan video that walks through it all. Very basic, but it is going to be based on you. No generic advice, it's your numbers. Click the link, fill out 2 minutes worth of a form, and I'll take it from there. In the meantime, go ahead and like the video if it was useful, subscribe for more, and I'll see you out there.